Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's installment of Washington Post Story Mode, the show where we break down the video game news of the week.
We is that
And Grayson.
is that only on my end, or was the
No,
connection there a
I'm
little
also
messed up?
hearing it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that's Nathan. I'm Shannon Leo. I'm also a video games reporter at the Washington Post, and today we have two special guests. We've got Jessica Gonzalez, who is now at Communications Workers of America as a union organizer, and we also have a current Raven quality assurance tester, Becca Agner. Say hello.
Hi. Thanks for having us today, Shannon. Sorry about the latency issue, but hopefully we can get that resolved. But yeah, thanks so much for inviting us on the show. Very excited to be here. And just the coverage that y'all have done for everything leading up into this has been just amazing. Cannot thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. I know that this is like a rare interview opportunity to hear from, like actual current Raven employee, and then also to hear again from you, Jess, who you have been part of the unionization effort from the very beginning, starting last year. So yeah, it's awesome. I would love to jump in, but first, I have to read a statement from Activision Blizzard. When they responded to the union vote, they said, "We respect and believe in the right of all employees to decide whether or not to support or vote for a union. We believe that an important decision that will impact the entire Raven software studio of roughly 350 people should not be made by 19 of Raven employees. We're committed to doing what's best for our studio and our employees." And so, yeah, with that statement out of the way, we can get started. Cool. Is your signal any better?
Am I audible? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
I can
yeah,
hear you, yeah.
you're back.
True.
Okay. Hopefully, it will remain that way. I guess that right there is a good starting point, though, right? Obviously, I think there's been sort of a talking point at Activision, this idea of like, well, there's this small group of employees who have banded together, who decided that they get to make a major decision like this. What is kind of your response to that?
Yeah, if I could speak on behalf of that. This is something that we've been here regurgitated over and over again from different avenues within Raven, as a small independent studio, as well as the parent company Activision. And really, what it is just a union busting tactic, where they're trying to scare people who maybe aren't as informed about what a union is into believing that, or even just disrupt people who might be questioning within the union themselves, if this is something that we want to disrupt the flow of the company and make this company unsuccessful. But the whole idea of GWA and unions in general is to give workplace democracy back to the people who are in the positions that are being affected. And when it comes down to it, GWA was created by and for Raven QA workers. So really, it's just a more fear mongering from Activision, which is disappointed, frankly.
Yeah, beautifully said, Becca. Like, I could not agree with you more. It is something that we've kind of been dealing with. I mean, this has been like a little over 5 months of just hearing a lot of the same messaging. And yeah, I feel like it definitely is aimed as like a larger broadcast to scare people who might not necessarily know what's happening into, being anti-union or it's really interesting that they say, they don't believe that the decision of the whole studio should be made by these like, small number of employees. But, going back like 5 months ago, the whole reason why GWA launched was because 12 testers were laid off without warning. So they're able to make these huge, livelihood affecting things happen. And then, finally, when workers are realizing that they're taking their power back and they want to continue to call it a third party when it's not a third party, it's actually the employees. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
For sure.
and then just to clarify, GWA stands for Game Workers Alliance,
Alliance, correct.
right? And yeah, I wanted to like get into like how both of you kind of responded to like all the news happening at Activision Blizzard last year, and why you felt like you should join this unionization effort, and how that kind of began.
Yeah. I mean, do you want me to start, Becca, or you want to take it? I can go.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, for me specifically, I started with a better ABK. I worked at Blizzard Entertainment for a little bit, for a little over 2 years, and then was in the gaming industry for around 7 years, total before I left the gaming industry. But there was the uh, state of California sued Activision Blizzard for sexual harassment and discrimination. And so, and then the response from leadership to that filing was very disappointing. So a lot of the employees felt like, they were speaking on behalf of all of us and, discrediting victims and, just kind of gaslighting everyone at the company. So that's when I really started to champion having employee power, because these things are just going to continue to happen. We are going to have our own best interests in heart. So I started organizing, and ABK is such a large company that it's really hard when the boss has the money and the power, and they're able to like hire anti-union consultants to talk to managers and really stress managers out, and they're kind of put in this place where they either have to like agree or lose their job, and it is stressful. But I remember when the layoffs happened at Raven, I had already been kind of organizing and talking and doing like committee work. So I was able to help them right away. I just remember we jumped in a Discord call and like overnight organized, they had spoken with a lawyer, they knew their rights already. It was kind of amazing to see them band together for this like one thing that they just weren't going to stand for. And we kind of just met in the middle, and both we joined because it's like most of it was just solidarity. ABK backing Raven QA because they are part of the Activision Blizzard family, and then it just grew from there. Really.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
can jump in from there if I can continue.
Mhm.
Please.
Okay, so my name is Becca Eigner. I am a QA tester at Raven Software. I've been there for about over a year. It'll be 2 years this August, and it's my first introduction to the industry. I came from the animation industry and was burnt out by that, and decided that for some reason the gaming industry would be any better. It's not. Uh, so my journey with the organization actually with the organization of unionization actually came from the same uh, catalyst that
Mm.
Activision Blizzard was being sued for the sexual harassment and sexual discrimination workplace lawsuit. And it was, Raven QA was actually kind of keeping their eyes on a better ABK and how they were responding to the situation. Because obviously there are women and non-binary and minorities in gaming industry, even at Raven Software, that are seeing things come down to our level. Even though we're a separate studio, we're still being affected by ABK. And so we were keeping our eyes on how that movement was progressing. And it was actually by their example that I was able to orchestrate our own in-person walkout at our Raven software campus, because we wanted to stand in solidarity with our coworkers to say that we don't condone what Activision is saying in response to these situations. We are the people, and frankly, the women and non-binary folks who are being affected by these things that the higher ups are commenting on that they're not personally being affected by. So that was like my first introduction to kind of even I would argue that was probably my first ever protest in person, and it was nerve-wracking, but I'm so glad I did it because it really prepared me for putting myself out there for more organizing efforts when it came to December. And 12 of my coworkers, 12 of my friends, were terminated. Their contracts, some at the end of their contracts, some in near the end, some near the middle, were laid off, frankly. Raven and Activision doesn't want to use the term laid off because they were contract employees, but really it's just semantics at that point. And it was because Jessica was able to coordinate with us, and we were able to get somebody like CWA to back us, that we had more knowledge at our fingertips to know what the next steps would be in the creating our own union.
Hmm. Yeah, and so I mean, at that point, kind of like, what were the next steps, especially in terms of like getting to this point of an actual union vote? Like, how did that all unfold on your end? And then also, I mean, like, obviously, you know, you were doing this within a big company in Activision, and so what was kind of their response that you kind of experienced internally?
Yeah. So there were the benefit to us having Communication Workers of America as our ally through this process is they've been through this process 100 different times with 100 different companies where they said, look, this is their playbook, this is their anti-union playbook, and this is what they're going to do. And lo and behold, the next day, Activision would do that exact thing. And we're like, huh, okay. And some of that organization process um, uh, to become formed GWA was even, okay, let's decide on a name. What do we want to go with? Well, we went with GWA, Game Workers Alliance, because even though this was a Raven QA issue, we recognized that what Raven QA is experiencing is not unique to the industry. This is an industry-wide problem. So we want to create a brand and a name that people, whether they're in QA, whether they're artists, whether they're engineers, they can see that name and see that brand and really rally behind it. Like, you're right, I do work too much and I don't get to see my family as much as I'd like to. That's stuff that everybody who is in the game industry, uh, these are problems that they're facing. Same with the sexual harassment and discrimination stuff that came out with Activision. Like, this is an industry problem. It's not a Raven problem. It's an industry problem. So we wanted to create something that um, will help people use us as an example going forward and say, well, they can do it, and we're also having these problems. So let's see how they criticize and improve on the system that we're in so that we can make the same steps to do the same.
Hmm.
So we January, gosh, I apologize. It has been a long, 6 months now.
It's been 6 months
This
of this.
Wow.
catalyst started in December. We officially requested for Activision Raven, we sent a letter for them to recognize us as a union. I believe the date was January 21st. And the following Monday, they ignored us, of course.
Hmm.
Following Monday, they announced that they were just going to implement the new embedded model there at Raven QA, which, to fill folks in on, before we were QA team that was working together in the
Hmm.
same department. We were our own department, and the embedded model's intent was to split the testers into different departments around the studio. So instead of the QA department, you would go to the animation department. You would go to um, uh, the audio department. You would go to the UI department, for
Hmm.
example. So whether or not this was a long-term plan for the studio for QA growth, what it ended up doing was it was a process that was expedited really to uh, split us apart. And really, we don't communicate like we had before. I can ramble on forever. Please cut me off if
Hmm.
I'm going
Oh
too
No,
no,
long.
it's all
I
good. It's all good. Yeah, this
It's been a
is.
love
long
it.
6 months.
It
Yeah,
has.
But
So much has happened.
This is
yeah. I
good.
mean, yeah, the part
try
that you're
to
just talking about though is especially interesting to me because I think from the outside looking in, when people saw Activision or saw Raven do that, they're like, yeah, this seems like union busting. And so
mhm.
like I guess my question is, you know, to you from the inside, did it also feel that way? Were you like, oh yeah, that's basically what they're doing.
It's hard to distinguish because we were never given that communication
Hmm.
directly with leadership. So we can't really decipher what their intent is because we weren't addressed. And so we're going to see every change as we're going to view it through a lens of skepticism. We might have been less defensive if they were willing to be transparent about these changes. Really, it was the rug kept getting pulled out from under us. And when they said, reassure us, or let me reassure you, you can trust us, you can come to us. Those were just words, because what they were leading by example is, we're just going to do what we want anyway,
Hmm.
and you're just going to have to deal with it. That's the example that Activision
Mhm.
was giving to us, because we weren't being communicated with, we weren't having discussions, and we weren't frankly, our input wasn't being considered either.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say that, like, of course we're going to view every change as an attempt to union bust, when it's also aligned with consistent emails that were that contained union busting messaging,
Hmm.
videos that were sent out that had anti-union sentiments of, like, all the reasons why unions are bad and no positives. They often said, this is a two-sided discussion, and everybody should be heard, and we want everybody to speak out what their opinion is. But all the town halls that were hosted at our studio were just leadership talking at us. The chat was disabled. People couldn't be on camera or, like, even say anything back. Um, and all the channels that these were being announced to were one-sided as well, coming from leadership. And so you have this dynamic where they sure do want to feign the illusion of a discussion, but by example, they're really controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said, Becca.
Yeah, if I can just
Agreed.
add, and then you can correct me if you think differently, Becca. But yeah, with the embedded testing model, it seemed that just after that there was a whole like meeting between in the national relations labor National Labor's Relations Board, between like Activision lawyers and then also like the Communications Workers of America lawyers, discussing, because they had to, because Activision was contesting whether it could be a group of quality assurance testers voting for a union, or should it be all of Raven Software Studio. And they were saying that because they have embedded all the quality assurance testers across the different departments, now there isn't a QA department, so it should be the entire studio, uh, co- uh, able to vote for the union. And so that was part of like Activision and lawyers' arguments in favor of getting everyone to vote, which would then dilute the number of votes in support of the union.
Correct.
So that was kind of what labor lawyers saw as like the strategy to union bust there as well. And that was like something that was kind of hidden from QA testers in the beginning when the embedded testing model started, because it wasn't really apparent what management's intent was there. But
Yeah. I mean, you said it perfectly, Shannon. We definitely, I mean, there's always a level of cautious skepticism when these things happen and when they were arguing. Because I remember I sat like that whole week in those hearings at the NLRB, and the lovely Reed Smith was trying to pretty much argue that QA was not an eligible unit. And it did kind of feel rushed, like they were trying to rush this embedded model to kind of like, stomp out the effort, legally. So we were definitely cautious about that, but it was actually quite funny because they started pulling up job descriptions between like QA and other departments, and they're like, "Are these the same?" And then Reed Smith or Activision would say no, and it just was a really drawn out process that you could tell that they kind of were trying to stomp it out before it started. It seemed, and like Becca mentioned, like the messaging from leadership is very one sided, and it almost feels a little bit of a slight when they talk about. And this is just my personal feeling, but when they talk about, we want everyone at the studio to have a voice. We want, this and that, but really it seems as if they're trying to bloat the numbers and get people to vote no. Because if I'm remembering correctly, I think they even had a graphic that said, please vote no.
Yeah,
So,
that's correct. In our emails that, we can't block those emails coming from
right. They're just being
leadership.
broadcasted.
hmm
Hmm.
If I could
Then,
also expand upon that, because some of their messaging too was that, this unionization process is going to take a long time, but
Yep.
they're the ones making it take so long, because
Yeah.
if Raven Software just did the right thing back in January and recognized us as a union when we were all asking for it, a super majority of the department, I want to say it was like 82% of the department wanted this union. If they
Yeah.
just accepted it back then we wouldn't even have to go through the process of having that hearing. And then it was Activision lawyers who kept requesting extensions
Yep.
for the election results to be pushed out, or
Hmm.
rather the hearing process to be extended. And then they are also fighting back about even challenging
Yeah.
the uh, the results of what the NLRB decided was the appropriate unit. They're trying to push back on that, which also was denied by the board. So you see these anti-union sentiments saying that, you don't want a union, it's going to take too long. But it wouldn't take as long if the company in its first place, in its first right, would just allow workplace democracy to take place and
Right.
the union to be recognized.
mhm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, also quick sidebar. I'm really enjoying the chat conversation between Washington Post Gaming and Washington Post Gaming's Shannon Liao.
Yeah,
um,
I do think it's funny. Washington Post said, "Hey, have they ever embedded the QA testers?" And I said, "Yeah, I've written about that on the Washington Post. If you can go back and read."
Love
But
it.
shouldn't the Washington Post know what's been written on it? Wow, this is suspicious.
but yeah, I mean, just like really quickly, I think Becca, you were in the middle of explaining, the kind of timeline of things. In January, you asked
Mhm.
for voluntary recognition of the union. I think then we kind of uh, did a bunch of meandering onto like different topics, but to just catch people up. So in January, you had like a majority of people within the Raven quality assurance tester like department wanting to vote yes for a union. So then at that point, you were able to go to management asking for recognition, and then management declined and started to have that debate with the NLRB over whether or not it should be the entire studio having that vote. And so what happened after that? If you could catch us up.
Yeah, so then there was a period of just preparing for um, the hearing in the first place. So because uh, Raven's argument was that Raven QA was not an appropriate unit for a union, and that they wanted the whole studio, which, as Shannon indicated, is a union busting, a vote dilution tactic. They want people who aren't even in the organization process, who don't even really, frankly, need the union. Though I will argue that everybody should want a union in their workplace. It's just workplace democracy. Even if you like your work, you should want to say in the decisions that are made that affect your lives. But we um, we saw the issues in the QA department, which is why we wanted uh, to be represented by the CWA. Um, so there was the lead up in preparation to the hearing. And between that time is when we started to see some of the anti-union messaging start to um, appear in our work channels and our work emails and stuff like that. Um, I apologize. It's been a long few months. I think the election ended up happening in mid-February, which election? I'm sorry, I keep making this mistake.
The
The
hearing.
hearing happened in
Mhm.
February, which I was one of the people who testified on behalf of the union. So there was the employer side, which was represented by Reed Smith, a notorious anti-union law firm.
Mm-hmm.
And they had some of our studio leads testify. He did not have our manager in the department testify, funny enough, even though you would think manager would have the most insight into how the department is run. That's just my opinion. But it was me and a couple of other, I think we had 3 total people who testified on the union side, and I was the last to testify. Which was pretty easy because all I really had to do was tell the truth. It made my testimony pretty straightforward. I didn't have to make up reasons why the embedded testers were doing things they weren't doing, and then get challenged on it. So it was pretty easy. I just had to explain what was going on. And then it was an excruciating, probably 2-3 months before
Yeah.
we heard the election results. We heard the election results in April. So from February to March to April, we were just getting bombarded with, it was on a weekly basis at least, that they would push out a new anti-union video. And that's something that Jessica kind of touched on was, it's hard fighting against a company that can pay people to, their full-time job is just making anti-union propaganda. Their job is to put out emails and flyers and statements. These directors that are putting out these messages don't even have to write those themselves. They have lawyers to write those up for them, and then they just hit send. For the organizers in Game Workers Alliance, it's just Raven QA. We still have full-time jobs. I still have to work 40 hours a week, during overtime seasons even more. So I spend my days off the clock, not getting paid to write up official responses and to put information out there. And when I'm arguing or, putting out my perspective that Activision says I'm allowed to have, when I'm putting that out there, it's me, the person, who's facing the retaliation against people who have bought into the anti-union sentiments. It's not the leadership that has to push back and represent their point of view. It's people who have, that have bought into the fear mongering that are lashing out at me and other GWA organizers that really, frankly, were just asking for better working conditions for our department.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, just to add, union busting under like the National Labor Relations Act is like illegal. But what management at Activision at Raven ended up doing was telling people that it would take really long, where they don't know if they would still have raises or benefits if a union were to happen. They don't know what the game development process would be like, and also, just that both sides can share their opinions, but a union isn't necessary, and they should please vote no. So that was how they kind of like towed the line between
Yeah.
illegal union busting and just talking to employees. So
Right. Which is always the thing that makes this so difficult, is that companies have all these mechanisms that they can use to functionally union bust that are not regarded legally as union busting. Um,
Yeah.
which, yeah, is, I think, probably part of the reason why we haven't seen anything like this happen until now, right? At least
Right.
at a major video game studio. And so I guess, like, going with that line of thought, my sort of question now that, the vote has occurred, that, workers have voted for a union, all of this is like, do you anticipate that Activision or Raven, or do you think they will challenge this in any way? Are they going to challenge the vote? Are they going to say, like, oh, we found some reason that this should be considered invalid and thrown out? Is there a way for them to do that?
So it's hard to say, and again, it's all, their words are not consistent with their actions. They can
Hmm.
say that they want to hear us out or that they want to work with us, but then there's always this underlying message of, well, it's not fair that 19 people get to decide what a studio of 350 people are affected by. It's this kind of messaging that, like, we want to work with leadership. full stop, end of day. That's what this initiative started as, is there's a disconnect here, and we want to reconnect what quality assurance testers are experiencing, because when we give feedback to leadership, they're misinterpreting it somewhere along the line. That's what happened when we lost 12 QA testers that we were asking for. At the time, we were all contract workers, and we were asking for full-time employment. I'm sorry. We were asking for full-time employment, better benefits. Like at the time, I didn't even receive vision or dental insurance. We were asking for better structure within our department so we could see career growth. These were issues that we came to Raven leadership about. And what they interpreted it as was, this was the wants and needs of the individual and not the group. So their remedy for that was to cut our resources, which we ended up hiring 11 people back. Not the old testers that got fired, but we have new testers. So obviously the demand for the labor is there. So it's hard to say that they're not going to, Activision isn't going to try to undermine our efforts still, even though we did win our election and they do have a union in their organization now. That doesn't mean that we've seen companies like Amazon try to refute the results of their union efforts and say, oh, the election was corrupted or rigged, or the NLRB made the wrong decision. When you have these multi-billion-dollar companies that make billions of dollars from the product that developers are putting out, there's no guarantee that they won't just break the law anyway and then use those billions of dollars to pay the fines for the legal repercussions.
Right. It's an easy thing for them to get past, so long as they have money, which they do. I guess the other side of that is that, and this is something that y'all brought to our attention right before the show, Microsoft has now said, or specifically Xbox boss Phil Spencer has now said, that Microsoft will honor the union. And I guess I'm wondering, like, especially in light of Activision's actions on this front, how do you feel about Microsoft's words here?
I haven't actually processed that. I just found that out, so I don't know if I can comment. I'm gonna pass
I
it off
totally
to
can.
Jessica.
Yeah, Jess can comment.
So
on
I
that.
like immediately after I saw that, I was like, I tweeted at Phil Spencer. I was like, hey, you want to grab coffee? Let's like talk about it, you know? I would absolutely love the chance to bridge that gap between leadership and workers, because I just feel like there's such a huge disconnect there. And even if this is performative, right? Because like the NLRB already decided they're a union. So it's like legally, even if you don't like it, it's still there, you know? So it's like it feels like he's saying, you know, the right thing, which is good, but I don't want it to be a misdirection and for people to lose steam, because, you know, obviously now he's on record saying he's like for it. So we can hold him to that saying, right? Like we can say, okay, so what if we organize this unit in QA? Or like, what if we organize this department? And have better protections and stuff like that. So just seeing the good faith, like we will open ourselves up to discussions with unions, which is great. That was cool for sure. And it also kind of puts Activision in an interesting spot too, because you know, they've been fighting so hard against everything, and Phil's just like, yeah, go for it. And so it does put Activision in a spot that makes them look a little bit immature, because they tried so hard to fight it, and you know, obviously they want this purchase to go through. So I don't know if this is just like the honey part before the vinegar, but we can hope that that it's a good thing. I mean, I think in general it's a good thing that he said that, and I will definitely be holding him to that. And Phil Spencer, if you ever want to grab coffee, let's chat. That would be great.
Yeah, I think this was back in March too. Microsoft had told me that, they would not stand in the way of a union. So this is
Yeah,
actually kind of like consistent with what they've said before.
true.
Yeah. One thing I will say that we kind of skipped over is just the fact that, Monday the vote was counted and there were 19 yeses and 3 noes. And I wanted to
Mm.
ask, Becca and Jess too, like, was that surprising? Like, and how do you feel now that you've won?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go first so Becca can
Oh,
talk,
please.
because she has like she's in GWA. But yeah, no, it felt really good. It felt like I mean, we still, even with the 3 no votes, we still won by a lot. And, that was even with, like Becca had mentioned, they had just hired new testers, to fill in the place of those that were let go. So it could just be, the 3 votes were just people that were fence sitters, or they didn't want to like be disruptive to management when they just joined the company, something like that. Because usually that happens, and employers use that to try to bloat votes or no votes. But I think it did so well, especially in the face of a huge anti-union campaign, like huge, like ABK wide anti-union campaign. And they even flew out the one of the Activision presidents to Raven, which is funny because like never happened, and they will say they want to open up a discussion, but it was just I cannot be more happy for them, and it's such a historic moment in games in general because it's like the first AAA studio workers that are unionized. So I think this is just a win all around, even with the 3 no votes. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Becca.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Exactly.
pick it up.
Mhm.
So where do I start? So the 19-3 landslide, I wouldn't like I wouldn't categorize that as like a shock or a surprise or anything. We had a supermajority back in January, of these were people who worked together and were friends even outside of the workday. Like these were people that want to be with each other and hang out with each other, and were were more than just like coworkers at the same company. We were the ones that were there for each other when things were the most tragic. That's when we came together and really said, like, we're not gonna let them do this to us. So when it comes down to it, like, I want to say that still having a super majority like that is quite lucky, because though our department is still probably the smallest, it's still rather small at Raven. We were like a roughly around 30 people, and then we lost 12, and then we were back to around roughly 30 people. Um, we lost a lot of those people who came out publicly that wanted this union, and
Yep.
either some were terminated, um, and part of them publicly supporting was their effort to keep their job, to fight back, to stay at the studio, because at the end of the day, we enjoyed our job. We weren't asking for our job titles to change. We weren't asking for um, our realities to be flipped upside down. We were asking to be paid more and to be able to not just like barely survive with a roommate in Madison, Wisconsin. We wanted to thrive at the studio so we could put those worries aside and focus on our passions.
Mhm.
Um, so having a new group of people get hired on, and they come into this this fire between QA and the overall company that they just joined. Um, these fights back and forth of pro union, anti union arguments, for them to be able to reach out and ask questions from both sides to say, what do I need to know to make a vote? That's what matters. What matters is the workplace democracy. That's always what this vote has been about. And whether or not you voted no, um, GWA is still going to represent the positive change that we want to elicit, not just in Raven, but in the game industry as a whole. We're going to, whether or not we got this union, which is great, because now we do feel like we have more of a avenue to voice these concerns. Whether or not that happened, it was important for us to always create and carve a path so that the next QA tester doesn't have to go through the same struggles that we did. So I'm relieved that we won this vote, but when it came down to it, I put in my vote, and that was what was within my control. And I actually didn't. I was at work when that happened, and I decided not to watch the NLRB hearing because I was like, "This is out of my control. Whatever happens, I'm still going to fight for my fellow QA testers to have their place in the game development process."
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
One of the things that you said that sort of stood out to me is you were talking about, the fact that you're doing this because, you want to be able to better do the thing that you're passionate about, that you want, resources and benefits and things so that you're not just struggling to get by. And I think that's like important to kind of restate because I think that it's very easy for companies to sort of frame employees who unionize and organize as like disgruntled and like, they don't even like the job. They're just doing this because they want power or something like that. But I mean, like at the heart
Yeah.
of all of this, right? Like your goal is to make your workplace better because you like doing what you do.
I just wanted to add that, Jess, you flew out to Wisconsin, right, for the vote,
Did.
and then you were wearing a cheese hat. Can you talk
Yeah.
more about like how all of you like maybe met up did you meet up in
Yeah,
person to
yeah, we
celebrate?
did.
So how was
So,
that?
yeah, no, it was great. We went to this place. I think it's called Union Square, right, in Wisconsin.
It's
And it
UW Terrace as well.
Oh, Union Terrace. Okay. Well, yeah, it was great. They had these like little chairs everywhere, and there was a huge one. And I bought a cheese hat, which was super cool. But yeah, we all met up there. And I was just like, okay, we can't live stream the NLRB hearing, but like I can relay it to people live. So what if we just like all gather together to, hear the results, and then I'll just tell the public who's been following us since, a better ABK and everything. So it was definitely a full circle moment to like have the solidarity virtual for so long. And then I was actually able to be there to support them in person. And it was just such a full circle moment of like, okay, everything that we went through in the last 5 months, it's all like here now. And the results, like, when they announced the votes, because there was a lot of yeses, and we were just like every yes, we were like, oh my yes, thank God. And then finally when we were like, okay, yeah, we won. It was just a moment of celebration. Everyone was like, oh my God, we won. I told Twitter, our live stream wasn't working, so I had to go on Twitter Spaces. And I was like, thank you, Twitter. And like it just, I was like, all right, I'm gonna go celebrate now. And we all just celebrated. It was great. Yeah, I could not be more proud of everyone at Raven QA. And just, I mean, this is such a win for QA in general because QA in the games industry is so undervalued, so underpaid. And the fact that the NLRB like saw us and said, yes, QA, you're arguing that they're a separate unit, but they're paid significantly less than like every other department in the studio. So it felt like a full, I'm not no longer screaming into the void. The void answered back and said that we have a union now, and now like we have all this steam and momentum. So it was a great day of celebration. And yeah, I mean we were trending, which was interesting. Like we made the front page of Reddit. Yeah, it was a great day. Yeah, it happened so quickly too. Um,
Did you keep the cheese hat?
I do have the cheese hat. I do have it.
Is it near you? Can you wear it right
It is in
now?
the living room.
Ah, darn.
Yeah, I would totally yeah, but I got my Wisconsin chair.
Yeah,
Oh,
a good a good consolation prize. I'll take it.
It's okay. I saw your cheese hat on Twitter and you sent
yeah.
me a photo
I'm
too.
an
So
honorary Wisconsinite now. It's decided.
Wow, that's amazing. A
If I
union
can jump
and
off of that
honorary citizenship in one day.
too.
yeah, you
Um,
can.
so we're talking about these folks that flew out to see us. And it was kind of funny because one of Activision's talking points for their union busting campaign was to say that like these scary lawyers and union representatives are from Washington D.C. They're not even from good old Midwest,
Hmm.
Madison, Wisconsin. Which 2 points to that is the first point is Activision. Where are your lawyers from? I'm pretty sure they're also not from Madison, Wisconsin. And the
Yeah,
other
Reed Smith.
argument is he Raven works with people all over the country, all over the world, and it's arguably a better, more inclusive environment because I have more access to different ideas and cultures and different types of people that I might not be exposed to in Madison, Wisconsin, and they're willing to fly out to meet me in Madison and buy a cheese hat, stuff like that. So, and not to
Yeah.
mention the lawyers that did represent the union in the hearing were from, they weren't even like, they were like what, like 200 miles from the studio is where they grew up.
Hmm.
So this argument was another fear tactic. So, you know, these are people who are coming together, recognizing, you know, you're getting quality assurance testers. They're going to assure the quality of
Hmm.
everything. And that starts with identifying problems and wanting to resolve them. And that comes with collaboration and communication from all types of folks who are working on the same product.
Hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to point out in chat, RJ Esposito just said, "So glad to see all your efforts paid off. Watching in admiration from Italy. I've done some remote QA work as a side gig and can only appreciate all the work QA staff puts in. Great job, Jess, and presumably also Becca."
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's so amazing to see other countries rallying. Like we have support from Germany, we have support all over, like France. I don't know if y'all remember, but like right before the DFEH lawsuit, Versailles closed down, which was a Blizzard office in
Mhm.
France. And they had really good labor laws and like the protections there were really good. So part of me was like wondering if, they just decided we're going to close the branch because we don't want to work with the union.
Mm.
So for them, I even had them reaching out to me after the election results and were like, this is so cathartic for me. I'm so happy to like watch y'all win your QA union and good luck and solidarity from France. So I'm just
Yeah.
super happy for like the people that I've met along the way. Like, yeah, it's been a long 6 months and I can't even like remember some timelines because I feel like every time I woke up, something new was in the news and it was just so interesting to follow and be on the side of it. And then obviously, wanting to help Raven and everyone, like I want to help everyone at Activision Blizzard. But yeah, it was just a full circle moment for all of us, and it's great to see the solidarity from other countries too. I love that we were able to get that like messaging so far across. It's
Mhm.
it's like unimaginable.
Yeah, so much has happened. Like a couple things we didn't even mention. Just like Activision Blizzard employees were on strike for weeks and weeks after
Yeah.
the 12 contractors were laid off at Raven, and then Jess, you started a strike fund, and now you work at CWA as an
Yeah.
organizer. So things have really come full circle for you, and this all started with quality assurance testers, who are as you mentioned before, like paid the lowest and treated poorly. And I mean, I also,
Yeah.
because Becca is here, I wanted to ask if you want to talk a little bit more about, like what it is to be a quality assurance tester and how you've been treated at the company.
Yeah. So like I said, Raven QA is my first introduction to the industry as a QA tester. I came from a small independent studio for animation in Iowa, actually, and I heard word of mouth from a friend of mine that he was working as a quality assurance tester at Raven, and told me how they treated QA differently, and it's the best place to work for QA. And I really did believe that for a long time. It was really Raven itself that tarnished its own reputation when it treated uh, QA testers like the rest of the industry, which is abusing temporary employee agreements where you are put on a contract for 12 to 18 months, and you might not have a job after that, or you know before I even started, testers were making $12 an hour. I think when I started, Raven bumped it up to 15, and then sometime around November, they bumped it up to 17. That was a year. I went a year without any sort of merit-based pay raise. So even though I would have all positive reviews, a 45-day review, a 60-day review, a 90-day review, I wasn't receiving any raise. So it's this chronic, it's a revolving door for QA, and they, instead of investing in these talented resources for long-term development, they're just picking them up, running them ragged, and throwing them out. And that's really what GWA wants to fix.
Yeah, and then the other question I had for, kind of both of you, as we're like gearing up for May 31st is the deadline for, like, the results of this election to be ratified, and then for people to start getting to the bargaining table with Activision Blizzard management and also the employees. What kinds of like things are you hoping to see or to talk about at the bargaining table?
You want me to go again? I can go again.
Yeah, sure.
I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a talker.
You're good.
So, like I said, Raven QA had this reputation, and really now our goal is to rebuild this reputation even better. We're still here. I'm still at Raven because I do love the studio, and I do want to work here with the people that made me enjoy my job. And I want everybody to feel the same way, and that starts with creating representation. We need a seat at the table, and negotiations are that. We need to have a role and a representatives to represent the best interests for what QA needs. And some of those interests include a structure. So QA has career growth. They need to have job titles and responsibilities that are clearly outlined. We need to be compensated fairly for what other departments are being compensated as. They should reflect the skill and importance of QA testers. And there shouldn't be something where, somebody who has been at Raven QA for 8 years is being paid less than the new tester they're hiring on. We want job security. I think everybody wants job security so that they don't have to worry about outsourcing or termination without cause. And we want to really just build the experience and expertise so that QA isn't viewed as some revolving door entry level position in the industry. It hasn't been treated that way in a long time. It's seen as a foot in the door, but then people are putting 8 years of their life towards just QA, and if they want to stay there, they should be compensated and treated and respected in that avenue at the studio. So that's GWA's goals for the negotiating table.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I'm gonna jump off of that, but yeah, I mean, Game Workers Alliance really, I think the goal is to just lead, like, be the industry standard and lead by example when it comes to like worker protections and worker, like unifying all of the workers on an like aligned goal of, ethically producing content that doesn't hurt developers, right? And I think that's a great goal, and I think it's great for the rest of the industry to be watching as well, because I can sense like multiple, a lot of people have gone through this process of like burnout and the revolving door of talent. Okay, I'm just going to go to an indie studio. Oh, it happens there too. I'm going to try this studio that my friend seems to like. Oh, it happens here too. And I think we're seeing the reason you're seeing a lot of support for the Game Workers Alliance and even the A Better ABK movement is because you have these developers who are seasoned in how the tech and game industries work, and know the compensation issues and know the, you know, the kind of struggles that it takes to get anywhere in the industry. And yeah, I mean, for myself specifically, I'm actually part of the anti-sexual harassment and discrimination committee that we launched for a better ABK and Game Workers Alliance, just to kind of be proactive in fighting against the reasons why the company is being sued. And, you know, a lot of it came from those errors that, you know, those missteps that were taken by friends of friends of mine had to go through getting breast milk stolen. Like that should never happen, you know. So just things like that, where it's like, yeah, it shouldn't even have to be written into policy, but we're going to proactively do this. That way we can make sure that like we're protecting people that come after us because of the things that the people that came before us kind of had to go through and learning from those experiences. So I think it's really important for us to have that seat at the table to be proactive and like, no, you know, we're going to fight against, like, we don't want sexual harassment and discrimination, and having that representation in different avenues, like having marginalized people speaking up in these committees is very important. Because if you have, you know, a board of directors who's all one demographic saying we're making decisions on behalf of every marginalized person at the company, but like without any input, that's obviously not what we're trying to see. We want that input from marginalized groups. That way we can, you know, make better policies and have better games. I feel like the games are just going to be great because developers are going to be happy. So it's a
Yeah.
win-win.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that committee that you're part of, Jess. And it was notable to me that I spoke to you and four other employees, and you know, they said that even though there's a federal settlement with Activision Blizzard for $18 million, the company still has a lot of things they could change and improve on. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you both for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks
much.
for
It was
having
great
us.
having you.
Thank you so much for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
us.
Hmm. Yeah. We are now going to move over to a different guest, the esteemed Adam Conover, who I've wanted to have on the show forever. And I'm so glad that we finally have an excuse. So wait, I
Hey,
think you are still okay. You are unmuted now.
Hello there. Thank you
Hey,
for
Adam.
having me. Is this
Yeah.
door, is this too much glare back here? Should I close that door? What do you
Yeah, it
think?
seems fine. I
I
don't
think
know. It
you're
gives you kind
fine.
of like it bathes you in an ethereal light.
Okay. Then I'll
Yeah.
leave it. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great to have you. And also, Adam, this is Shannon, my colleague. Um,
Hey, Adam.
yeah,
Nice
who
Nice
will
to
to
meet
meet
also
you.
you.
be part of this fun segment. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to get you on the show because, you know, you obviously have a pretty like pronounced interest in labor organization in general,
Yeah.
especially with regards to the entertainment industry, but you follow video
Mhm.
game stuff as well.
Yeah,
And so I
very
guess
closely.
like, yeah. And so where I wanted to start is just like, where did that interest in kind of the video game side of things, especially with regards to labor organization, come
Yeah.
from?
Well, let me say first of all, just because you said I have an interest in labor organizing, I should say that
Mhm.
I am a board member of the Writers Guild of America West. You'll probably important to know that.
Mhm.
I in terms of labor organizing the video game industry, I mean, what sparked my interest about it is just the stories that I've read over the years about the horrible working conditions in video games. I mean, I've played video games my entire life.
Mhm.
I'm a fan of the industry. I continue to follow the industry as an adult. I'm up to 100 hours in Elden Ring this year, etc. And I just started reading these articles, hearing from developers about, the incredibly hard conditions under which they work. And it's honestly one of the most brutal white collar professions in the United States. We've gotten very used to outsourcing labor that is this exploitative in the United States, but
Mhm.
and much video game work is still outsourced, but also a lot of it takes place in the United States. And so when you hear about people working 100-hour weeks for months on end, it's a little bit hard to believe. And then when you realize that that's endemic to the entire industry, it becomes very disturbing. And I what really got me started thinking about it was, over the last 10 years, I've entered the what we call the entertainment industry, which is a bad, pretty old fashioned term, talking
Mhm.
about the television and film industry that is centered specifically in Los Angeles, California, that generally produces most of our scripted television, scripted films, things like that. And that is a union. That is a industry that is very heavily unionized, which is unusual in America today. We have the entire industry isn't unionized. There's plenty of non-union sectors, but the writing is union, directing is union, acting is union, and much of the crew work, not all of it, but much of it is union, famously so. And that means that there's a certain set of standards that applies. Like, on Adam Ruins Everything, my own show, we almost never shot more than a 12-hour day. And the reason we never did is because there are union rules that they don't prohibit it, but they penalize the companies for exceeding 12 hours. And hearing about video games, I realized, my life would be so much more brutal and so much less compensated if not for the fact that I happen to work in a unionized industry. I'm lucky enough that the writers, the talent, the crews, close to 100 years ago, decided to form these unions and then continued to build power such that, the people who spend the money, the corporations in question, generally feel for the most part that they need the union labor to do it. And so they end up signing up with the unions. That benefits my life in countless ways. I mean, one of them, just to take, in addition to labor conditions, as a writer, depending on what platform you're working for, as a writer, director, or actor, you receive residuals when the show airs because there's an understanding. This is a deal that was made many, many decades ago that we are handing over our copyright to the companies, right? Which is actually at one point was unusual in the entertainment industry. Because if you think about, for instance, playwrights in theater own their own copyright to the play, right? Novelists continue to own their own copyright. They don't sign it over in perpetuity to Random House. But as a screenwriter, everything I write becomes literal property of the company that I write it for. And in order to ameliorate that, in order to account for that, the unions won residuals, which means every time it airs, every time my show airs on True TV, they cut me a check. And, the check is of diminishing amounts every time it airs.
Sure.
And by the way, residuals don't exist nearly enough in streaming, in Netflix and et cetera, that part of the industry. And that's something that the unions are currently working on fixing. But so I, as a creator, actually have a stake in the profit of the enterprise in close to perpetuity. And so, I just saw the gap between the work that I do and the way that I'm compensated and the protections that I have and those that are afforded to the people who make in my opinion, the greatest new art form of the century. What I often say is that in video games, we are looking at, film, but in the 30s or 40s. That's what's so exciting about it. People are still discovering what can be done with this art form. New ways of creating this art are coming about. New possibilities in the medium are still being explored. New profit means are still being explored. But along with that, we are also in a far earlier stage in terms of the labor movement's work in that space and the workers being taken seriously. And so as I've gotten more involved in the labor movement in my own industry, I've also had an interest in following the labor movement in video games, although I really have mostly been doing so from the outside.
Yeah, that's actually really a good point and something that I've seen. Also, hi by the way, but I'm Shannon,
Hello.
and yeah, I mean I've talked to a lot of people who like left the film industry, TV industry, and then went into video games, and then they said, oh my God, now I'm really working so hard and overtime, and I feel like I need to leave. So I don't know if you've like encountered people like that, ever heard those kinds of experiences of people comparing the two, and like you said, that because the video game industry is not as unionized, is not very unionized at all, except for these two unions in North America, that their work conditions just simply are a lot more unbearable.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't hear as much about workers going back and forth between the two industries as you might expect. And the comparisons are kind of interesting. Like in the Writers Guild of America, we often talk about, hey, we should unionize video game writers. That's something that comes up a lot in guild discussions. A lot of members say, hey, that's something that we should do. And the work is so different that it's a little bit hard to see the translation. Writing a video game is so fundamentally different from writing a screenplay or a television script. But I certainly know of plenty of people who worked in video games and then left the industry. The story that you hear is, people, hey, if you're 35 and you work in video games, you're old, right? Because most people burn out before that. And that's not something that you hear to the same extent in television or film. Now, television and film are also difficult industries, and they've gotten much more brutal over the last few years, especially for our crews. There was you might have seen, there was a lot of the IATSE, the crew union, took a strike authorization vote late last year because of the ways that the push to streaming has really lengthened people's hours and made the work much more brutal. And that is a growing problem that is as of yet unresolved. But it's not the same degree of, God, you can work in it 10 years and then you got to go find something else to do that you see in video games.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, as long as we're talking about kind of potential interoperability between these industries, I guess what I'm curious about is the idea of useful parallels between these industries, because as you were saying, the initial push toward unionization in entertainment happened almost 100 years ago. Obviously, circumstances were very different at the time than they are now. But do you think that there are any sort of parallels in terms of either how it happened then or how it happens now that people who are working at game studios, people who might be interested in organizing, could draw on?
Yeah, there absolutely are. I mean, so first of all, I recently read a book about the early days of the Writers Guild. It's called The Writers, and it's by Miranda J. Banks. It's a wonderful, somewhat academic history of the Writers Guild. But so what I learned from that is that the Writers Guild formed, or what was then called the Screenwriters Guild formed, back in the days of the studio system, and that was when companies owned they were entirely vertically integrated. They owned they employed the writers. They claimed to own their IP. They owned they had everybody under exclusive contracts. They made the movies in-house, and then they also owned the theaters. And the writers were doing work for hire, and they were seen as interchangeable. It was oh, let's put Bob on this movie. Let's put Phyllis on that movie. And they were not treated as, the artisans that many screenwriters like to think of themselves as today. They were treated as cogs in a machine. And I think that's a very fair comparison to the way that video game workers are currently treated.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
Video game workers are treated with a lot less respect than workers in the entertainment industry. And there's plenty of people in my part of the entertainment industry that are treated with not enough respect. But, they're treated as interchangeable. Maybe there's a director or a producer who's seen as a big piece of talent, a Ken Levine type, an auteur type. But basically everybody else is, just a warm body. But despite that, that doesn't mean that you don't have leverage. If you work in video games and you have skills and talent, those are skills and talent that you've built up over years that other people don't have. That there's a limited pool of, folks that those companies can draw from when they need to make their games. And that's what you need. That's the leverage that you need in order to organize and in order to take the power back for yourselves. And so I do think that, looking at those early days can be helpful, especially because the video game companies now are getting larger and larger and more consolidated, which is the same thing that was the case of the movie industry 100 years ago. Now, the big difference is that corporate America has gotten about 1,000 times better at anti-union drives than they were back in the 20s. And we had, up until basically the last year, a much more hostile regime towards labor in Washington. Unionization can't really survive unless it has protection under the law. And we have had a legal regime for the past 50 years or so that has, been anti-union. That's luckily starting to change. We're starting to see the NLRB and the Labor Department actually step up to protect workers for the first time in a long time. But at the same, and we have, corporate America has pushed with anti-union drives so hard. But I think the unions are starting to learn their tricks. I think workers are starting to learn their tricks. I think when people see those anti-union, flyers and emails, they understand what they mean now in a way that they didn't before. One of the things I think is really interesting is that the first, video game union in North America is at a QA facility,
Right.
because I honestly would have expected it to be folks who are higher up the food chain in terms of, now I'm not saying that anybody is above or below anybody else, but in terms of how the corporation sees them, right?
Right.
I would have expected level designers, the art departments, people like that, because those are folks who have an enormous amount of leverage, in my opinion, because those are the artists who you need. But the fact that the folks who are, the QA testers and are seen as even more replaceable are the ones who are stepping up, I think should be a cue to the rest of the industry. Hey, if they can do it, certainly you can, at least certainly you can consider it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, this was alluded to in the previous segment we just did, but some of the quality assurance testers who were you trying to unionize, they like left the company in the meantime. Like they just didn't find it like comfortable anymore. They didn't want to be there anymore, or they had to go. And so it was, they have become interchangeable, but it's still this wave of quality assurance testers keeping the momentum going. And then there was a like software engineer who went on Twitter to explain why they thought that video game companies have not seen unionization from like a software engineer or like a game designer level, because those jobs, the salaries are better, they have cushy benefits. It's a little bit harder to then argue among those people that, oh, you should actually try to unionize because
Mm.
maybe you can just get everything you want as an
Hmm.
individual negotiating with your boss rather than going through a union. So I wonder if you could talk about why a union would benefit them even in that case when they have this great salary and all these benefits.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a simple answer to that when people say, "Well, hold on a second, I can negotiate by myself," right?
Hmm.
Um, First of all, only a very small number of people actually have enough leverage to negotiate all by themselves. In my industry, I, as a showrunner and television host, I have an agent and a lawyer, and a lot of times a project that wants to work with me specifically needs somebody like me, and I'm not replaceable, and so I have a lot of personal leverage. That being said, I still benefit enormously from being a part of two unions. First of all, I have some of the best health insurance in the country, frankly, through the Writers Guild, and I only make that health insurance via the union, right? Via my by union negotiated fringes that my employers have to pay that go into a pension and health fund that is managed by my union. That's why I have health insurance. So that's the first thing. Also, residuals are an enormous income driver for talent in Hollywood that is not negotiated by the agents. And in fact, in recent years, Netflix and Disney have basically been able to use their massive leverage, right, as these giant corporations that have consolidated, to eliminate what is called back-end participation, which is where previously a show creator like myself would receive a profit participation when a show does well. They've actually been able to eliminate that form of compensation, but they haven't eliminated residuals because that's part of a union contract. So even as somebody with an immense amount of leverage, I still benefit from being part of a union. But on top of that, what I would say to, I think a lot of the folks who you're describing don't actually have as much leverage as I do. They don't have the leverage of a Ken Levine. But also, even if they say, "Hey, I don't know, I'm well paid. I can yell at the boss. I can like advocate for myself and think I deserve a little bit more." You have to think of it this way: how much you can get out of a salary negotiation is always dependent on your leverage, right? What you can demand, how much power you have, not what you can ask nicely and get, not what you can, appeal to someone's better nature and get, but how much literal power you have in the workplace, right? So as an individual, your power is basically, look, I can either walk or not walk, right? And that's all you have. If you are negotiating as a group together, if instead of one person saying, "I'm going to walk if I don't get this," you have 50 or 100 or 500 or 1,000 people saying together, "We will walk if we don't get this," you can get a lot more. That is the nature of power. That is the point of collective bargaining. When you have multiple people negotiating at once, they can get more than individuals can get negotiating alone. And what I think is there's something very sneaky that the companies have done, which is that they have tricked the white collar, affluent, well educated workers into thinking that the individual approach works better. Hey, we get you really nice lunch all the time. We're really nice. Oh, you're a pro. Oh, we are so happy to work with you. Blah 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 blah. You got a nice office. They do, all those bullshit tech industry perks that make people feel special and make them think, oh, wow, I'm a big muckety muck and I don't need to band together with others. But I guarantee you, if all of those people got together and said, we're walking unless we get more or we get what we need, they would get a lot more, because that's the nature of collective bargaining. And just to put it this way, your boss isn't negotiating individually with you. Your boss has gotten together with everybody else in the company to form a big company, negotiate with you collectively. So if you want to win that negotiation, you're behooved to get as many people on your side as possible. And that is the literal point of a union.
Right. Well, yeah, and like there's another thing that you said earlier about kind of the way that like you're a little bit surprised that QA in particular is sort of leading this charge. But I think it's also notable that, we're talking about people realizing that they can have this sort of collective power in industries where they didn't originally. And like, so you see QA doing it in video games, and then like warehouse workers at Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
regular workers at Starbucks. And I think that you get all these people who like part of their impetus is that they are the lowest on the kind of like totem pole. And as a
Mm-hmm.
result, kind of end up at this place of like, they are the most vulnerable, often the most mistreated. And as a result, like the ones who I think have the most to gain, and also who are just
Mm-hmm.
probably the most at their wits' end with the status
Yeah.
quo, right?
I think that's probably correct. I mean, I don't want to speak for those workers, but I think that's probably correct. And
Mhm.
something that you'll hear from, workers who are higher up the totem pole or higher up the compensation ladder is they'll say, well, if we don't like it, why don't we just go somewhere else?
Mhm.
And that's because they have the sense that they could go somewhere else, right? That is an
Right.
advantage that those more, I don't want to say highly skilled, those more in demand workers have, right?
Mhm.
But that's not to say that they can actually get a better deal somewhere else, because a lot of times companies collude, especially when it comes to not headhunting each other's workers and things like that. The tech
Right.
industry is notorious for colluding to keep the wages down of high value engineers and workers like that. So I think it's, and also, by the way, I'm always of the opinion that like you shouldn't have to leave a job that you like in other ways just to have a workplace that is not abusive or harmful. And in fact, it's cowardly to do so. You should fight to make the place that you are at better than it is. That's
Mhm.
part of making the world a better place. That's like saying, I don't want to try to solve gun violence or abortion access in America. I'll move to England, right? Well, we all
Right.
know that sucks to do that. And that if you can't, that's not a solution. That's like, hey, nice for you. I guess you can peace out if you want, but the rest of us are still stuck here, right?
Mhm.
So I would make that argument. But also, the folks who I think are in QA or at Amazon Warehouse 3, they don't have the option of saying, oh,
Mhm.
well, I'll go work someplace else, because they know that like it fucking sucks out there in America right now, and there aren't better places to go. And that comes up a lot in Writers Guild work, is that like a lot of times, we're saying to each other, a writer will say to me, hey, well, what if I don't like it? Why don't I work for a different company? And I have to point out to them, dude, no matter where you go in the industry right now, you're going to be treated the same way. And that is the point of collective bargaining, right?
Mhm.
We have that is so that we can raise the floor for workers across the entire industry.
Right.
Not just in our one place. Because the wonderful thing is the real end game, this is what the Writers Guild has been able to do,
Mhm.
is that if you are able to grow the union large enough, you can grow it beyond the one company. You can start getting other companies to agree to the same contract. And then you are raising the floor for workers across the industry, not just at, the one company that you're talking about.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, like, speaking of kind of that net effect, I think one thing that's kind of worth noting about this particular moment, in addition to just like the proliferance of unions and organizing in video games, is that there also seems to be a level of like, I don't want to call it convergence yet between games and the entertainment industry, but there's a lot more collaboration happening now in terms of like films and TV shows based on games. Some of them, like The Last
Mm-hmm.
of Us one, being made in conjunction with companies like Naughty Dog. I mean, like the Russo brothers worked on like Fortnite related stuff recently. There's all this metaverse talk and, spanning multiple mediums,
Yeah.
doing transmedia narrative, things like that. And so, I mean, like, looking at that, do you think that that stands to impact how, potentially both of these industries organize, or how workers kind of, are able to organize within both of them?
That is a really interesting question.
Hmm.
Because the question is, does it change the nature of the work?
Hmm.
Like again, my argument for uh why the industries are similar but they're different. The work of a writer in video games is enormously different from the work of a
Right.
writer in the entertainment industry. And one of the reasons is, the leverage of the Writers Guild in the entertainment industry is that the writing comes before anything else. Before you do anything else, you need a script. And without a script, you don't have a show, you don't have a movie. And that gives the Writers Guild a lot of leverage. Without a director, you don't have a movie. Without, et cetera. That's not true of writing in video games, right? Like a lot of video game companies don't even know that they have writers. They're like, what? We need a writer to do this? Like it's, who cares, right? And so the work of a writer in video games is very different. Writers have less leverage in video games than they do in the entertainment industry. So the fact that The Last of Us is being made into a TV show, it's being adapted by Craig Mazin, who's a very high-powered writer here in Hollywood. I don't know that that changes the reality on the ground for a writer who works for Naughty Dog.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it is here's what I will go out on a limb and say, that now that video games are seen not just as something that you're going to sell directly, and that is going to make you money, on Steam or at GameStop, but as a piece of IP that you want to develop into an overall franchise,
Right.
that increases the value of the work that the creative staff on a video game staff is doing, right? If the adventures of Nathan Drake are going to be turned not just into a video game, but a movie and a comic book and Happy Meal toys and blah, 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 right? That means the company is making even more money off of the work that the designer of Nathan Drake does. They're making even more money off of the work that the writer does, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That gives those workers more leverage. It's more money that the workers can extract from that system. And so I hope that the workers see that as empowering themselves, because it makes them even more needed. That is my optimistic case for that.
Right.
But the truth is that as the industries become more consolidated, as they start to buy each other, it gives the companies more power, and it gives that means the workers have less leverage. The workers, the demand to collectively bargain becomes even larger on the workers. It's harder for them to do so, but they'll probably feel even more like they need to do so in order to get a fair shake.
Mm.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that like Netflix is getting into games. At some point it was like HBO. It was sister companies with Warner Brother Games, and then Disney also was making games. And then there's also the fact that voice actors from the film and TV industry were then going on to games to voice act
Yes.
there. So there's just like so much connectivity between these two industries. I wonder if you have thoughts on how that could impact unionization or not.
It's a really good question. I personally have very little confidence in Netflix's game strategy. And I say this, by the way, as someone who has a new show out on Netflix, which I would like to take a moment to plug. It's called The G Word. It's out on Netflix right now. It's a show about the U.S. government. It's an investigative documentary comedy series. So I have a new show out on Netflix. However, I'm a skeptic about Netflix's foray into video games, because I think when non-gaming companies try to enter the game space, they normally don't understand what games, not just what gamers want, which is sort of like a narrow notion of like, gaming culture, but they don't even understand like what makes a game good. So for instance, the choose your own adventure video games that Netflix was doing a couple years ago, which led to them doing, make a bigger foray into games. Those made a little bit of a splash, but they weren't actually good. Like people didn't actually like playing them. And that's because Netflix didn't realize that in video games, there's like a 30-year history of companies trying to make choose your own movies, and they always fail, because the truth is nobody wants to sit there and watch a movie and just choose option A or option B. They want to play an entire video game, or they want to watch an entire linear movie. It's like this weird uncanny valley. When they came out with Bandersnatch, I was like, this is going to make headlines, but it's not actually going to work. And I was right, because I know more about video games than they do, right? And so, same stuff with like Apple Arcade, before the Switch came out, people were literally saying that Apple was going to like kill Nintendo because they were going to dominate portable gaming, but Apple fundamentally didn't understand what is important about gaming. They found a niche for themselves, but they didn't realize people like buttons at the end of the day, that those are important for playing video games. And so they have Apple Arcade, which does okay, right? It's like a little value add for app, but they're not a player in video games, right? And so I'm a skeptic about Netflix. I think that is just a little play to get a little bit of investor interest, but I don't think they're really going to go there. What was your original question? No, I went off on a long tangent.
No, I mean, that was great. That was a great answer to any question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Actually, we should just ask your opinion on all these film and
Yeah, we
TV
should just rattle
companies.
off different
Getting
topics. Yeah,
into games. Yeah, what do you think about Disney's
we
like
can do a segment called
game?
I'm a
Adam
hot
Rants
take
about
machine.
everything.
No, it was great. I was just asking if, like as Netflix gets more into gaming and also these voice actors are from the film industry getting into
Yes.
voice acting in games too, if that would impact unionization, especially if I don't know if the actors are guild protected, for instance.
Well, so right now, voice acting in video games is an area that SAG-AFTRA, a union of which I'm a member, is working on. That's the Screen Actors Guild. And we have had limited success in getting more voice actors covered by SAG-AFTRA and getting them the protection that they need. And I think that's partially because SAG-AFTRA is entering a new world that is much more brutal than the previous, than the film and television industry, which has a longer history of working with unions. And I believe that SAG-AFTRA, again, a union of which I'm a member, needs to be a lot more militant with how we deal with those companies. SAG-AFTRA, I think, tends to take too soft of an approach, and it has resulted in a lot of video game voiceover actors, like, frankly, injuring themselves on the job. Like, one of the big problems for actors in video games is vocal stress, because they'll literally be asked to go in and for 8 hours just do the sound of getting shot, right? Like that for 10 hours. And that's a real problem for voice actors. In video games, it's repetitive. They're asked to do the same thing over and over again, get multiple takes, and they end up damaging their voice. And I know that maybe sounds silly, but as someone who works with my voice, I have damaged my voice in the past. It's some like just getting basic vocal rest protections put in for those actors has been very, very difficult for SAG-AFTRA to do. I think it's something that we need to do, and I think it's something that our membership is going to increasingly demand as the industry gets more brutal and as they start to converge. But honestly, what I'm worried about more is the entertainment industry of which I'm a part learning bad habits from the video game industry and saying, oh, well, look at how these dudes abuse people. What if we start taking a cue from them? We could own everybody, own all the IP, pay everybody nothing, make them work 100-hour weeks, and, nobody's going to do anything about it. And that's one of the reasons that I think, seeing unionization in the video game industry is really, really important. Because at the end of the day, I think media companies need to stop acting like I think all of us working in the media industry need to stop seeing the division so much, because we are all competing for the same eyeballs. TikTok is competing with Bethesda, is competing with Netflix, is competing with CBS. And guess what? Those companies are all buying each other. So, I do think the convergence is going to change things in unpredictable ways. I'm frankly worried that it's going to erode unionization where we already have it, and that's why it's so important that we expand unionization in these new areas.
Yeah, especially like in these moments. I mean, I think that the Microsoft purchase of Activision Blizzard is a good example, right? It's like the workers at Raven who disunionized are part of Activision, a company that is about to be swallowed up by an even bigger company. And so it's like, unionize while you can, because like it may not be possible in the future, and you want to get those protections as early as possible, because when a company gets bought, it often gets reorganized, which can lead to layoffs, things like that. So I mean,
yes, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of unions. This has happened a lot in media. That a union has been formed just in time to get everybody's severance when the entire unit is dissolved. That's something that we've seen at a couple different places. And guess what? It was sure worth it for those workers to sign up for that union, because they got, probably 3 months of pay that they, instead of 0, right? So yes, do it while you can, but also it is never too late to unionize, and to start talking to other workers in your field about what it is that you need, what your pressures are, what your problems are, and how you can better achieve those goals together.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also an interesting moment because and this is a bit of a digression, but I'll bring it back around. Basically, like I think it's interesting the way that games workers are perceived when you talk about them in comparison to workers in other industries. Like just a couple weeks ago, Shannon and I worked together on an article about reproductive rights and like how the video games industry has sort of replied to that or not really like said a lot. And in some cases has kind of like prevented workers from speaking out, stuff like that. Um, and there's this like reaction from a lot of people, some of whom were not even Ben Shapiro, um, who basically were they acted as though we had like tried to ask Mario and Luigi about reproductive rights and not like these massive publicly traded companies,
Yeah.
which was interesting to me. And in a lot of cases there's bad faith, right? But there are a few people who like legitimately were just like decent people, but who felt that this was a ludicrous idea that games companies could matter, or that like the workers for them could be under fairly poor conditions in the grand scheme of things. And I guess I just wonder, like, do you think that there's still, after all these years and after games as an industry growing to this massive size, still this weird like perception of games as like a toy for kids, and like these little like that they're not being made by like these major companies, that they're being made by like, I don't know, Santa and some elves or something, that like there's
Oh,
still this
absolutely.
weird idea of what games are and how they're made.
I mean, there's a couple of problems going on here. Number one is exactly the last thing that you just said, that like there's a lot of people who think that video games are trivial and for children, or there's a lot of adults who their only memory of playing video games is playing Mario Kart as a kid, right? And they don't they don't think of it as something that adults do.
Mhm.
Then there's a linked problem, which is that the video game industry has tried to obfuscate its workers
Mhm.
for the entire time. It is, but they don't want you to know anybody's name. They don't want you to know that there are real people making these games, that they work under real conditions, that they have offices. I mean, every once in a while, there'll be a Shigeru Miyamoto or a Ken Levine or a Hideo Kojima who, they hold up as an auteur.
Mhm.
But that's extremely rare, and it's usually because those individual people are egomaniacs, or because the company decided it was somehow
Yeah.
in their best interest to do that. And so people think that the games come from magical elves, or they think they come from some kind of faceless developers. They don't have a sense that these are like workplaces full of real people who have real lives, who have uteruses or health problems that need to be taken care of. So that's a problem as well. And then finally, I think we have a really unsettled opinion in this country about what the political commitments of our major corporations should be.
Mhm.
We have, first of all, and there's two things happening. One is that these companies have spent the last 10 years hopping onto social justice trends in optical ways,
Mhm.
and they've gotten people used to thinking that that is a form of activism,
Right.
and it's not entirely not a form of activism. You know what I mean? Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, he's a gay man. I believe that his support for marriage equality, he comes by it honestly,
Mhm.
and I believe that when Apple probably has put in policies in place that have actually benefited folks in that regard, right? That's
Right.
not to say nothing, but there's also a whole lot of just corporatization of pride and all these sorts of things that are optical and nothing else, that are following a fad.
Mhm.
And so now that there is a frankly right-wing campaign to roll back hard-won rights of the last
Mhm.
5 decades, those companies are starting to waver and waffle, and we don't agree about what we should do about that, because there are some who feel that the most important thing is that Disney take a stance, right, on don't say gay or etc., and that's
Mhm.
an important form of activism. It may be, it may not be. Then there's also the issue of these companies have starved their workers of the benefits that they need. And so sometimes when we're demanding that these companies step up, it's because it's workers actually demanding workplace benefits that they have to have. For instance, if workers are saying, there's a difference between saying, hey, I want Activision to put out a statement about the end of Roe v.
Right.
Wade, and saying, I want Activision to make sure that as an employee, I have access to reproductive health care if I need it. That's a huge difference. And we're not always parsing which of those we mean. I would say the statement is, it's nice that they can do it, but who gives a shit? But the other piece of it is a labor issue that we need to care about a lot. And those two things get conflated a lot, right? Like, we're not, are we talking about virtue signaling, or are we talking about a workplace labor issue? And then, of course, you have the people who are acting in bad faith, who want to stop companies from doing anything that doesn't fit their political agenda, which is the political agenda to roll back those rights, which is an entirely different issue. So that's what makes this so complicated, is all these forces are coming together to a head simultaneously. Like, if you look at Disney, it's all of those things happening at once. And I don't think any of these companies are immune to it.
Yeah, I mean, the Activision Blizzard coming out with a statement thing actually did happen. They did come out with a statement, Roe v. Wade, and I had interviewed an employee, Emily, who came forward with her real name. She's a trans woman, and she had said like Activision Blizzard did not do enough. And then after they came out with the statement, I went back to her and said, "Do you think they did enough now?" And she said, "No, it's still not enough because there are like no guarantees, no protections." I did want to ask you a question from the chat,
Please.
though. Somebody said, Adrian said, I was curious if Adam has any thoughts on what specific protections that unionizing workers in the games industry should go for, when they're trying to push for unionization. What should they be asking at the bargaining table? Yeah, I'm assuming.
So that's actually not a question for me to answer. I mean, I could guess, but the fact of the matter is that workers at the bargaining table should be asking for whatever issues are important to them. And the only way to find out what those issues are is for those workers and whatever organizers they might be working with to ask each other what the problems are. To me, as an outsider, I'm like, the hours sure seem like a problem. And I would look for restrictions on work hours. That's just based on what I have heard, but I don't work for any of those companies, So just to give you an example, in the Writers Guild West right now, we have a contract negotiation coming up next year, and the very first step of that process is to go to the workers, go to the writers, and ask, what is it that you need, and literally do a survey, right? And so that's what those workers should be doing, because for a couple of reasons. A, that's just, the whole point is to get the workers what they need, not what someone else thinks they need. Number two is that's how you build power. If the workers are fighting for something that they know that they must have, then that is what is going to hold them together in solidarity through the long negotiation process. The core of any collective bargaining is to say, what is it that we would rather walk off the job than work without? Right? Because your only leverage at the end of the day is a strike threat, is to say, we are going on strike and, you're going to have trouble replacing us. So what is it that you can say, either we get this or we walk? And that's going to be different for whoever you're talking to. Something that's often I hear about in media, the media world, it's, what's it called? When you can't be fired without cause, right? That's that's one that I've seen in a lot of media.
Yeah.
So say it again.
Termination without cause. Yeah.
Yeah. Termination without cause. Putting in protections against that sort of practice, right?
Yeah.
Or having IP protections about your work being turned into a documentary or a movie, something like that. That's what's important to those workers. What's important to a television writer might be residuals on Netflix, right? That's something that I hear a lot of writers talking about right now. Or being made to do free work. For video game workers, it's going to be up to them to decide, and that's the cool thing about the process.
Yeah. One thing that I will also add as a tip from my own experience on this front is that I'm coming from like GeoMedia, GMG, all of that stuff. Way back in the day when the first version of that union contract got made, there was a no strike clause put into it. and that severely hampered the ability of the union to effectively kind of, use its leverage. So,
Yeah.
for anybody who's trying to get a union contract, make sure you can strike. It sounds basic, but
Well,
companies will try to take that away pretty much immediately.
Well,
Yeah.
no strike clauses are quite common, and the way it usually works, I believe the Writers Guild has one as well.
Mhm.
But the way it usually works is you wait for the contract to expire, and then you can strike because now you're no
Mhm.
longer under contract.
Yep.
But there's a lot of folks in the labor movement who feel, and by the way, the Writers Guild has used that ability to strike
Mhm.
many times,
Yep.
most famously in
Including with Geo
2007.
Media,
Yeah.
actually. Yep.
Yes, the Writers Guild East did it.
Yep.
Well, yeah, because Geo Media members are members of the Writers Guild East, which is our sister
Mhm.
union. And in 2007, the Writers Guild West used that power, even though there was a no strike clause, the contract expired, and then
Mhm.
those writers at that time went on strike. And if they hadn't done that, I would not be in the union today, because what they
Mhm.
won via that strike was jurisdiction over the internet, as they called it then, which means streaming. Like Netflix
Mhm.
shows would not be union under any union if the Writers Guild had
Wow.
not gone on strike in 2007. So you still can go on strike, but there are many in the labor movement who feel that is that cuts you off at the ankles, because you may want to go on strike in the middle of your contract just
Mhm.
because the companies are being enough of an asshole that you need to prove something to them when you are
Right.
when you are still under the contract, your 3-year contract or whatever. So that's a very good point.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I will add is, yeah, I was at Fox Media, which is also part of Writers Guild of America East. But actually, there was one thing when they were going through the bargaining process and they were looking for a contract, and it took about 2 years, 1 year to get the union people to start unionizing, and then 1 year to get the negotiations. And then in that 2 year time frame, management said they would freeze raises for 2 years. So there's no raises unless you were getting a promotion or a merit raise. And then there's one thing with Raven Software, Activision, Blizzard, bring it back to gaming, where management has hinted many times that's going to be a long negotiation process,
Mm.
and they can't really guarantee benefits, or they can't really guarantee what's going to happen to people's salaries. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that kind of situation, and is that something that like workers have to watch out for?
Right? Yeah, they absolutely do. I mean, so when your process of forming a union is protected under law, if you do what my understanding is the Raven Software folks did, which is file for a union election and win the election, you have a union and the company must bargain with you. However, that doesn't mean that they need to come to a contract agreement with you. They can stall forever. They can say, and this is a very common thing, happens all the time. It's happening to unions right now in the entertainment industry. They'll say, oh yeah, let's start bargaining. We're not free for the next 2 months, so let's meet in August. And it's a stalling tactic, right? And they do that, and that is what I will guarantee you Activision will try to do to the people at Raven Software, because they don't want to give the union the appearance of a win. If they give the union a better contract with a win, then other parts of Activision might say, let's unionize as well, right? So the battle, what that means is that the battle is just ongoing. You have to battle to form a union, and then you have to battle for a contract. And so what you need to do is use your leverage as workers in order to force the company to come to the bargaining table. So how do you do that? You can do it by putting outside pressure, doing a social media campaign, doing a blame and shame campaign, saying, how dare they? But you can also walk off the job. You can go on strike. You can do a work stoppage. You can do a slowdown. You can do all, look, I'm not a union organizer, right? And I hope these folks at Raven Software, and I believe they do, have some really great organizers working with them who figure out how to use their power to bring the company to the bargaining table. But here's the thing. The contract is the goal, but an improvement of working conditions is the goal, but using worker power is always the means. And so once you have the union, actually, I don't even want to put it that way. The formal definition of the union under the National Labor Relations Board is not even the most important part. The most important part is the collective power that you build as workers, right?
Mm.
Having the formal union, great. More important is that you have all your workers, they're communicating with each other. Everybody knows what everybody else's issues are. Everybody is on the same page, and everybody knows, hey, if we, here's what we want, and here's how we're going to go get it. And that power, once you are able to harness it, that is what will get you there. So, and that most commonly is used to go on strike, right? To say, okay, we're going to walk off the job. Now, if you don't have enough collective power because you haven't communicated enough with your fellow workers and gotten everybody on the same page, you could call a strike, but maybe only half of the people will actually go out on the picket line. Or maybe you'll strike for a couple days, but people will start trickling back. And then the company won't be under pressure anymore because business will be going on as usual. So they won't be under pressure to get the contract. So that building that collective power is the most important thing. At the end of the day, that is what is going to win you the gains. Not the company deciding to play nice. It's going to be you showing them that they are going to lose money unless they bargain with you. This is. I've not yet served on the negotiating committee for an entertainment industry contract. But what I've heard from people who do is that, you go in, you sit across the table from the company, and you say, "We need this. Don't you see that things are bad for us? We can't feed our kids. We are hurting ourselves. We're hurting our own health. This is this is unjust. This is immoral." And the companies just go like this: "No, can't afford it. So, sorry, it sounds great, but we can't afford it." And then you can beg and plead all you want, right? The only way that you will actually get them to make the concession is if you show them that if they do not make the concession, it will cost them even more money because you will walk off the job or you will slow down work or something like that. That is literally it, because at the end of the day, they're just calculators, They're just saying, are we gonna make more money this way or that way? And if you make it so that they lose money unless they give you what you want, then you win. That's it. And you do that through harnessing collective power. So, and what that means is that winning the union is just the beginning of the fight. You need to continue bringing it to them every day to prove that to them.
Right. That's always the kind of thing that I think maybe right now the video game industry will now have to, if not reckon with, and at least understand, is like, there's a union now at a major video game company that is not like the finish line, that is the starting line.
Correct.
Well, yeah, just to add, I mean, I think that like Raven Software has been like even the workers across Activision Blizzard have been doing some of these things before the union even started. Like they've been striking for weeks. They did 3 strikes last year, and then one of them went on for like 2 months. And they also called for like politicians, like the senator of Wisconsin, to like recognize them, and that's something that I know is a tactic within unions, is to ask a politician to endorse you and then call for some attention so that it receives like more notice from across media and like other government officials. So I think they've like done some of these things even before the union materialized. It's just worth noting.
Yeah, I mean, those things can all help. But I think there's a common pitfall in union organizing, and I see it in my own industry of people feeling that statements and Twitter hashtags and things like that are what force the companies to give you what they want, and they're not. It's just showing them that they're going to lose money. Those other things help you build legitimacy. It helps you get your other, other coworkers on board, etc. Oh, wow, we have a lot of power. But at the end of the day, it's are you throwing a wrench in the gears or not? And if you do throw the wrench in the gears, unless you get what you want, then you're more likely to get it. But yes, all those other forms of organizing are important. They are just not by themselves sufficient.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I guess this kind of leads pretty naturally into the following question, then, which is just that, like, we are now at the point where, again, Raven has a union. It is, going to be officially recognized. Seemingly, Microsoft has said they're going to recognize it. All of these things, both for Raven in particular and kind of for the video game industry. What do you think happens next? I think that a lot of people look at this and say, okay, well, this is the beginning. Probably other companies or other like workers at other companies will follow suit. Do you think that there's a good chance of that happening? Is this the beginning of a much larger wave of collective organizing within the video games industry?
I mean, I have been astonished every day by the wave of organizing that we've seen nationally. It is the single most like positive thing that I've seen happen in the news, because this kind of organizing, let me be really clear, is first, it makes workers conditions better. But then this kind of organizing is how we change everything in the country. You know, like on the ground organizing is how, you know, the civil rights movement won its great victories in the 60s. We have spent so long thinking that all we need to do is go vote for the right politician once every 4 years and donate money to the right big organizations. They'll fix everything. When in reality, it's individuals organizing together into collectives to get things done. And the labor movement is the model for that. And we are starting to see that pop up more and more places. So the wave that we have seen with Starbucks, right, is so positive. Now, none of those stores have won a contract yet. But the fact that, you know, the company is not able to stop them from, you know, from this spreading like wildfire is unbelievably positive. And it means the message is getting out there. And so I'm not going to make a prediction about whether that's going to happen in the video game industry, but I hope that it is. And I hope that other workers throughout the industry are looking at what Raven is doing, what the workers at Raven are doing, and are saying we can do the same thing, because the truth is that you can. It's now it's the unique thing about Raven is that it's a small shop, right? What do you remember what the election results were? Like the number of people?
Oh, it was 19 votes yes and 3 no, but it's about a group of 28 people. 2 of them were contested, so like roughly 26 people.
So that's a company. The bargaining unit is like 30 people, right? So that's a lot easier to win an election because you have to have a lot less conversations. You know, that's why, you know, at Google, for instance, they've had such a hard time organizing because Google is like this gigantic company and you would need to talk to so many people. And the company specifically makes it difficult for you to talk to your coworkers. So that is the real question for me in the tech organizing sphere is when are we going to move from these small shops organizing to an entire company or an entire unit of one company organizing? That is the big win. And I don't know. I was going to say I hope that the organizers are thinking about that, but also the most important thing to do is make the small victories and roll them into the bigger ones. And so I hope that they just keep pushing forward. Whatever happens, I'm going to be very excited to watch it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is a good note to probably wrap up on. If you have any sort of closing thoughts that are not just those ones, feel free to share them.
Look, can I just take a second to plug?
Yeah, of
Yeah, you
course,
can
obviously.
definitely.
So please watch my new show, The G Word, on Netflix. It's about the federal government. Specifically, we go and profile the on the ground workers who make the government run, and what they do to, you know, keep us safe, and ways in which the government is screwing them over and making their jobs harder as well. So please check that out. And I also do a podcast called Factually, where I have
It's
covered
very
labor
good.
issues. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I
I listen every week. I love it.
oh my God. Thank you so much. I
Yeah,
cover
of course.
labor issues a lot on that show. We've done a lot of historical episodes we did a historical episode about labor unions with Stephen Greenhouse. We did one about the labor wave that we're seeing sweep the country with Hamilton Nolan, who's a wonderful labor reporter. And I talked with Jason Schreier, who I believe is a former colleague of yours.
He is, in fact, and he's been on the show
About
before.
yeah, about working conditions in video games that we recorded. All that stuff is available in our back catalog, and so check it out. The podcast is called Factually. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, well, fantastic, and thank you again for joining us. It's been
Yeah.
awesome
Hey,
having you on.
thank you, folks. Really, really wonderful being here. Thanks for covering this issue.